Can you now hear me? Yes. Wonderful, thank you so much. So my name's Melissa and I'm the Executive Director of the Cambridge Conservation Initiative. I've been in this role since the summer and it's an absolute privilege to be able to oversee and work with 10 of the world's leading conservation organisations and the University of Cambridge, all housed just next door to here in the David Attenborough building. And CCI is, of course, a collaboration fundamentally, a collaboration that integrates action, research, education to bring about the kind of transformations that will enable people and nature to thrive together on our pressurized planet. And isn't transformation needed at this point? Here we are in late 2024, going down as the hottest year on record, while global carbon emissions are continuing to rise. We've got, as we heard at COP16, more than a third of the world's tree species now facing extinction. And amidst a Rio trio of global conferences of the parties of those big conventions, which are quite clearly failing to deliver on the financial and the national commitments to bend these curves and secure the futures that people and non-humans alike will need, many of whom are, of course, already experiencing catastrophe. Where can we find sources of hope? Where can we find the kinds of transformative change now so badly needed? So it's in this context that we do need inspiration and we do need hope. And the new book by André Hoffmann and Peter Vanham, The New Nature of Business, The Path to Prosperity and Sustainability, is, I think, incredibly important and timely. And it's really exciting to have this opportunity to discuss its vital messages with the authors here this evening. So, André Hoffmann will need absolutely no introduction to many of you. And indeed, to those of us who work in the David Attenborough building, we see his name as the helper of the founder of the atrium every day as we arrive at work. He's a committed environmentalist, and he's one of the most eminent business and philanthropic leaders in the conservation and sustainability world. He's also a long-standing friend and supporter of CCI and the wider university, including through his Maver Foundation and personally. In terms of background, he's the great-grandson of Fritz Hoffmann La Roche, who founded the drugs company Roche Holding in 1896. We're going to be hearing more about that. He's currently the vice chairman of the company. He's also played and does play many, many other international roles, including serving as international vice president of WWF and on many boards, including Wetlands International and indeed the CCI Advisory Board. For this book, he's teamed up with Peter Vanham, himself an absolutely prolific author and journalist who writes about the global economy, sustainability, and the most inspiring business leaders, often writing with them as well as about them. His earlier books include Stakeholder Capitalism, which he worked with the World Economic Forum chairman Klaus Schwab a couple of years ago, and Before I Was CEO, which was a 2017 book. His many articles have appeared in media such as the Financial Times, the Harvard Business Review, Foreign Policy, and he's currently editorial director at Fortune, writing features mainly on the purposes of the corporation, squarely on our topic tonight. So we'll hear in a moment from André about both the inspiration behind the book and some of its key stories, messages, and arguments. Then we're going to hear briefly from three really brilliant discussants, all leaders here in Cambridge who bring different expertise and angles to the book's issues. So we'll begin with Lindsay Hooper, who is interim CEO for the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership, which activates leadership globally to transform economies for people, for nature, and for climate. Then we'll turn to Jaideep Prabhu, who's one of the Vice Deans of the Judge Business School here in Cambridge and the Jawaharlal Nehru Professor of Indian Business and Enterprise, with research interests in innovation, marketing, international business and strategy, especially through a sustainability lens. And finally, but by no means least, we'll turn to Noelle Kumpel, Head of Policy at BirdLife International, fresh off the overland journey back from Baku at COP29, and with long-standing conservation field experience in Africa and Asia. She's also currently leading a CCI collaborative project on nature-positive business and finance. So they'll each speak for about 5 minutes, and then we'll open up for Q&A with all of you, and finally move over at the end of the formal proceedings to continue informal conversation around a drinks reception in the Whale Hall. So without further ado, André, over to you. Tell us a little bit about this book and why you wrote it.
I shouldn't sort of hide it. I am quite moved to be here today. This Cambridge Conservation Initiative, as an initiative, and the David Attenborough building has been part of my life for the past 15 years. So it's quite exciting to be here and to talk to you about what we're doing now. I think it's important to understand why you should actually listen to me. I'm a businessman, but I am also deeply steeped into this tradition of conservation. With your father, my father created WWF, was one of the founders of WWF International, and all my youth at home we were talking about nature, we were talking about environment, we were talking about the disappearing pandas, the disappearing birds. My father was an ornithologist, he absolutely adored birds, and so we talked about this quite a lot. At the same time, of course, my great-grandfather started one of the biggest companies on the planet, Hoffmann La Roche, which is a pharmaceutical business. And at the dinner table in the evening, there were the two things present. You know, on one side, there was nature and scientists coming to talk about nature. On the other side, there was innovation and science to help the patient to get better. And these two things allow me, I think, to, a couple of decades later, allows me to sort of create these bridges between the two worlds, the business world and nature. And at the time we talked about conservation, we talked about trying to protect nature. Today we talk about including nature into what we are doing as humanity. And that's the title of the book, The New Nature of Business. Now, when I was born some years ago, there were about 3.5 billion people on the planet. There are 8 now. So I see people trying to work out how old I am. I'll tell you, I'm 67. Okay, and this new nature, this reality of the 8 billion people today living better lives, longer lives, healthier lives, better educated lives, with infant mortality at the lowest possible that we have ever seen. I mean, all this shows to us that this prosperity that we have is an exciting thing. It's an exciting achievement. Business has helped us to create the prosperity that we all need, because the 3 billion people at the time did not have this life. Now, at the same time, this prosperity, of course, has been very expensive. You might have noticed that I'm carrying the Sustainability Development Goals. The goals of the United Nations, the Millennium Goal, lifted nearly 800 million people out of poverty. So there were, and when I say poverty, I mean $2.50 a day. So they really were successful in their approach. But it has created a situation which all worries us now. You could actually argue that the relentless activity of business has destroyed the planet. And now we need to recover, we need to regenerate, we need to move into a sustainability model. And so to get to this sustainability, to this sustainable prosperity, we're going to have to address the symptoms of the current prosperity. The symptoms are quite clear. They are present in nature. I mean, we talked about climate already. They are present with plastic pollution, persistent organic pollution, a lot of different symptoms on natural front, but they are also obvious in the social capital and in the human capital. And I'd like to talk, because that's one thing of the book, these 3 capitals and how we impact them. So I see the world divided in the human capital, i.e. us. Are we happy? Are we finding the place where we want to be able to serve society? I believe that humanity has a lot to do with the commons. How can we together contribute in a way that works? You know, it's the Maslow pyramid at the top, the self-realization. How do we get to a point where we can contribute to other people in a humanistic way, in a human way? That, I think, is a very important thing. It's what kicks us out of bed in the morning. You know, if we go out of bed in the morning and we end up doing something we don't want to do, but we think we have to do because society asks it from us, we end up being unwell. You know, mental health is a real issue. And I can see a lot of people struggling with this contradiction. We know that the current status quo is pushing us over the precipice, and we still continue to work towards it. So there are issues we need to address there. The next capital we need to talk about is the social capital. And I would define the social capital as the social contract. You know, what are our rights, our obligations, our duties to each other? Why do we want to be together? What keeps us together? What allows us to go further as a group? So, you know, why, for instance, are you here today to come and listen to me? You could be doing something else. But you think that there is some... You could be, couldn't you? but I think that there is a cohesion that we are looking after, and that's very strongly linked to the human capital, but it's clearly distinct. You know, and of course the third thing is nature. Nature, not the panda, the meerkats, or the Amazonian rainforest. Nature as the life support system on Earth. Nature is life, and we have built our existing prosperity on the destruction of life. And so we need to move away from extraction and pollution and try to go towards regeneration. And one of the tools we can use to do this is to understand these three capitals and to measure them and to understand their interdependencies. You cannot think of one of the three capitals without the consequence it has on the others. When you cut a tree, it has an impact on the social and on the human capital as well. And if we don't really succeed in linking these three capitals, we cannot create the sustainable value we need. At the moment, we just measure short-term profit. We just measure short-term profit maximization. Success is making money, but making money really at all cost. And I'm using this word advisedly. So going forward, we are going to have to find a way of creating value that lasts, and that is going to be taking into account these collateral damages we do by using the wrong thing. So it could be said that accountants will save the planet, because accountants will be able to give us the metrics that are going to put a value onto each one of these capitals. And we were talking about Baku just now, but at Cali, this was very much a conversation, in particular among the business community. How do we find the way of measuring the impact we're having on biodiversity, on climate, and on social and human capital? For companies, that probably means that in the near future, they will have to produce an integrated profit and loss account. A profit and loss account which is not just going to measure financial flows, but also the impact we're having on the free capitals. I'm sorry, I'm hiding that's the here, it's probably well. So that's the first bit of the book. How can we understand the consequences of our being on the planet, and how can we minimize the negative consequences by looking at the free capitals? The second part, I think that is equally important, and it's, again, they're all related, is the fact that we need to put nature on the balance sheet. That's a bit of a placative statement, but we need to make sure that we realize that nature is not inexhaustible, it's not relentless, there's not enough of it for all the things we want to do. And at the same time, we are treating it as if it belongs to everybody, which it does, but only private people can actually benefit from it. So this was a bit of a complicated sentence. Let me try again. The way to really value nature is to understand that it has a cost. A liter of fresh water or a kilo of air, or whatever you want to use as a measurement, is not for free. It has a tendency of being exploited like if it was absolutely, I don't know how to pronounce the verb in English, inexhaustible, thank you, that's the one I meant. Yeah. And in the long term, it's not. It is. You know, we're getting to planetary limits. We're getting to the end of the system. We are using more nature than there is available, and we are certainly using it faster than we can regenerate it. So, if we want to use the current capitalistic system to continue to manage the public commons, we are going to have to make sure that we actually put a value to them. Again, this notion of accounting, but this notion of accounting and putting value on something that doesn't have a value yet, and that's something that that we have to remember. Of course, when I have this conversation with business people, I usually get sort of nods. But here I'm talking to people who enjoy nature, talking in front of the Cambridge conservation community. And so it's shocking, isn't it? The fact that I say that nature is money is shocking. But I'm just trying to use the existing system to bring it to something where we can respect and treat it. Just idealism is not going to take it, and that's why I want to talk about that. And that leads us into our third solution proposed in the book, which is who are the people who are going to make a difference? How are we going to find the leadership needed to implementing these changes that we need to go for the long term? And these changes are needed in a couple of different levels. It's not just identifying individuals, it's also creating the structure which will allow us to take this right decision. So creating, for instance, places like the David Attenborough building where NGOs and universities and visitors can talk together and have a sort of safe place, and thank you very much for guaranteeing this, a safe place where you can talk about this issue without being immediately disqualified. In today's environment, if you want to make a decision based on nature, you're going to have to justify why you do it because nobody else does it. And if nobody else does it, you're not going to be able to convince. And this is what the principle of a safe place means. We need to identify the ideas with humility and then courageously implement it going forward. And for that, we need a place where we can ideate on that basis. So these are the three planks of the book: impact, nature evaluation, and leadership. And there are a couple of examples in the book of companies who are doing this, and they are doing this very, very, I think, successfully. And by doing this, they are contributing to the problems. But the fundamental idea is a very simple one. The current status quo is not sustainable, and we need to make sure that we shift it by taking into account the situation of all. We need to move away from short-term profit maximization. Nobel Prize winner in 1976, Milton Friedman, the business of business is business. We need to move away from that model into what I call the commons sense. We need to be able to manage the commons for the benefit of all. And that could be very rewarding. That could be something that would keep everybody in a sustainable prosperity going forward. But at the moment, the biggest indicator of lack of balance of the system is the rise of inequalities. The fact that we are at the moment at a difference in income which has never been bigger. And this is what has created a number of these problems, in particular the political development of the last couple of weeks. Voilà, I think that's all I wanted to say for the book at the moment, and perhaps we can move on to a conversation. And now, thank you very much.
Wonderful. I'm enjoying it. As we move on in the discussion, I'm sure there are many here who'd like to know a little bit more, as I would, about your own personal story and the story of Hoffmann La Roche and the founding of how you came to these ideas. But let's leave that for now. I'm going to turn first of all to Lindsay to give us some of your own thoughts and reactions to the messages here.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the book. I think it's excellent and really timely. Nature in particular is really rising up the agenda for business. Businesses that we work with are increasingly recognizing the limitations of the structures, the markets that they're operating in. And as we saw at COP16, businesses are now showing up in force because they can see that it's significant. But I think the challenge is many of them are still focused on hero projects in the margins, kind of proof of concept, but are still not able to really move that to core business. So there's a lot of buzz around nature positive and nature positive projects and the billions there, and not enough on the trillions of economic activity that's currently undermining societies and undermining nature. So I think it's very timely and inspiring to have a book which is taking a very holistic approach to the full dependencies and a systematic approach to how businesses can really structure thinking. This is core and not to the side. I've also seen that it's been inspiring. I was just saying I was in Hong Kong last week, and it was being held up as an example of an approach that businesses should start with rather than a kind of make money in damaging ways and then give something back, which was great to hear. But what I really liked was that it recognizes that we need system change. We can't rely on the cumulative impacts of individual businesses that are enlightened and get it. The data, as you said, tells us that we're not making enough progress. We've had political backlash, we've had market backlash. Even some leading businesses are having to step back because the markets simply won't sustain the costs of transition or operating in this way. So I think we can't rely on voluntary action. We need to change the rules of the game, and that will require state action. It will, as you said, require regulation, changing to accounting norms and standards. So it needs to be more profitable to protect nature than it does to damage it, and actually it's the reverse today. So it's really valuable to have this a business voice speaking out for this. I think my questions there are, so what's the model of change? And you alluded to those about where the leadership will come from. And I'm interested in, well, what's the role of business then? It's not just to sit back and say, well, we'll wait for regulators, we'll wait for state action. I think there is still a role for business. A lot of our work with businesses, including at COPs recently, has been to have, build momentum around a progressive business voice saying, it's in our interest, please change the rules of the game so that we can transition. There's also, of course, the role for business to innovate, create new, more sustainable forms of value. We also, though, recognize that in most democracies, we won't get the politics we need until it's relevant to citizens. And what's the role of businesses in strategic communications, telling the truth to population, using their marketing power and potential? And I know that we've worked with the business school in some of these areas as well. So I'm interested also in views on what's the role of business here. The second, and to the story then of the family and your own story, the role of private wealth and strategic philanthropy. The book is very compelling about the long-term perspective, the sense of purpose, the sense of place and community, the risks that you're able to take, the agility, which I think are quite distinctive and strengths that privately owned and led enterprises have. But I'm also really, and it's no surprise, the Hong Kong group I was talking to was very much a private wealth strategic philanthropy forum. And I see some of the most interesting moves and developments coming from strategic philanthropy, getting upstream to start to tackle some of the root causes rather than just try to address the downstream symptoms. So whether that's through providing catalytic finance, it's building capacity within markets, building real rigor in carbon and nature markets so mainstream finance can have more confidence, or even building movements to change the rules of the game, starting to build momentum and wider popular support to get stronger state action. But I know that I think WEF figures say that only 6% of global philanthropy is focused on climate and nature, in spite of the scale of the challenges. So I suppose I'm interested in your views on, well, are you optimistic that will grow, and where do you see the greatest potential catalytic interventions for private finance? And then the final point would be the role of universities. The book spoke about universities and curricula, and I'll leave Jaideep to speak to that. You've already referenced the amazing catalytic space here that is bringing together research with practice. There's obviously the core university strengths around research and teaching tomorrow's leaders, but there's also the work we do to engage with today's leaders. We can't wait just for tomorrow's, the engaging today's. There's catalyzing new innovation and solutions, and Cambridge, of course, is a place that's famed for its entrepreneurial spirit and the catalyzing new enterprises. But I'm also struck by, and I don't think Tony Juniper's here, but I know he's a friend of CCI. He talks about the role that Chicago played in socializing and building momentum around the concept of free markets, and how influential they were in mainstreaming that. And it strikes me that Cambridge, with that proximity to business and entrepreneurship, with the conservation strengths here, with the business school, role in public policy, we and others could be playing a role to be influencing new economic thinking, to be building momentum around economic state action that really embeds nature at the heart of it. So also interested in your views as you work closely with universities on what you see as the key roles of academic institutions.
I think perhaps, there are some questions there. Perhaps we'll hear from our three discussants and then maybe come back to you, André, if you'd like to respond to some of the points made before we open it up to the floor. But Jaideep, how about you? What are some of your responses?
First of all, delighted to be here. This topic of sustainable business is a hugely important one, not just for the world, but also for businesses in particular, and as a business school professor for business schools. So speaking for our business school here in Cambridge, this is a topic that a lot of my colleagues, some of whom are in the audience, are very concerned about. They are actively researching these topics along with our PhD students and research students. So it's affecting our research in a very important way. But it's also something that we have introduced in a big way into our curriculum, because our students want to know more about these issues and how they can work for companies that can be more sustainable as businesses, in every sense of the term sustainable. So a hugely important topic and a very important and timely book. There were three things that I took away as highlights for me about the book. The first thing, very importantly, is you argue and provide a logic, an intellectual case for why it's important for businesses to move away from a short-term profits approach to an approach that guarantees long-term sustainable, inclusive prosperity. And the logic that you provide, which I find compelling, is that you argue that success in business doesn't just depend on financial capital, but also these other capitals. And you mentioned it in your introductory remarks: social capital, human capital, and natural capital. And it's very important, therefore, to be able to first recognize those various forms of capital and then start to measure them. And that's some of the challenge, where the practical challenge comes in. But that's what we as academics are trying to do, and what we're trying to get our students to learn about. So that was the first thing I took away. The second thing, which I found very intriguing, is the fact that here we have, at the heart of your book, is the story of a very large, important company, global company, Roche, and in a very important sector. And we get the insider's view on that business. It sort of reminded me a bit of Net Positive by Paul Polman and Andrew Winston, where Paul Polman had been 10 years in that insider's role at Unilever. But that's just 10 years. In this case, we have someone who's part of a family that's been there for several decades. And what I also found interesting is the ownership structure of Roche, which I hadn't fully appreciated. That the founding family, still has a significant role in the running of the company and the ownership of the company, alongside shareholders. And that gives you, in a way, the ability to perform competitively in the short run, in a financial sense, but also to have this long-term kind of view where the family has kind of stewardship of not only the company, but also the communities in which it operates. So that was the second thing I took away. And the third thing, which is quite close to my own heart, is the role of purpose within such a large company. I've spent the last few years, along with co-authors, studying how very large companies, particularly listed companies, are increasingly trying to use purpose as a mechanism to be able to balance financial performance alongside social and environmental objectives. And while there are clearly many strategic reasons why it's in the benefit of companies to do that, it's still very difficult to do. And there's a lot of backsliding for various reasons. I mentioned Unilever. Some of the successors of Paul Polman have undone some of the things that he attempted to do. But where it does work, we are finding, is where there is a close alignment between the purpose and the business model. And you show how Roche has achieved that in a very significant way. You also talk about some other companies that have done it, but Roche in particular. And I'm very struck by your purpose of doing now what patients need next. Is a very clever way of doing that. It unifies the whole company around that purpose, which then drives things like innovation, which are so key to not just short-term but long-term performance, which have social impacts, positive impacts. So that's very striking to me. And then also how it is so integral to the entire company. You've embedded it within, so every employee's role is to think about sustainability alongside financial performance. And That's quite hard to do, and so quite remarkable when it's done in such a large organization. So those are three things that I took away, and I'd love to follow up with a conversation about how that was done and how it continues to be done.
So, Noelle, what were your reactions?
It's working? Yeah, great.
Yes.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the book. I started writing some notes before I took it with me on my journey home from Baku. I started writing some notes and then found that so much of it kind of echoed what some of the points I thought were important to say. So yes, I've just arrived back on Sunday evening from Baku, from COP29 on my overland journey, in an attempt to reduce my flight footprint. So apologies for for the haggard look and any inarticulate talk here. So you may have heard a little bit about how things went there. The expectations were low, and the outcome pretty much matched that. We got a deal on climate finance in the end. It took a while coming. But the 300 billion per year fell far short of the 1.3 trillion that was needed and led by developing countries to developing countries by 2035. So both quantity and quality fell short dramatically. And as for nature, the limited references that were in some of the agenda items at the start pretty much mostly dropped out. So together that's pretty disastrous for economies and societies as well as wildlife. There's no route to 1.5 degrees without nature, and over half of global GDP is dependent on it. So while vulnerable peoples and communities are going to be worst hit, this is also a very real and urgent issue, a material risk to business. So it's not just it's a big inequity problem, but it's a problem for businesses as well. I wasn't at COP28, but colleagues were, and as described in the book, the B team were there, and together they really helped to get these the commitments that we saw there to phase out fossil fuels, to triple renewable energy and double energy efficiency by 2030. So that really sort of underscores the benefit of that visionary and united advocacy that the B team, and which André is part of, were helped with there. And I like the comment about courage is a team sport. And that highlights the level of influence that enlightened and courageous businesses can have, and the convening power that they can bring others along with them. But that we need to keep up the pressure. We were simply outgunned in that regard at COP29. And another take-home from COP29 is that while nature featured kind of strongly in dialogues, events, speeches, and it's definitely much more mainstream than it was, there's a need to move beyond the kind of cover decisions and the titles of side events to actually getting down to the detail needed for actual delivery and getting it integrated into the actual decision text and the meat of the delivery. And we need to make sure that governments step up in terms of the urgency and the action to meet the commitments they've actually made. And owe to current and future generations. So we've got these commitments, and then there's not much going on behind them. And there was a similar picture at the Biodiversity COP 16 in Colombia. A record number of business and finance were there. Big, buzz, energy outside the negotiation rooms, but inside, essentially, many of the key items collapsed, particularly when it came to putting money on the table. So that just reinforces how we really need to step these processes up. And then sort of just something I love about André's book is the focus on practical action and sharing an honest perspective on the challenges, but also lessons and successes in as to how individual companies and then sectors and as society, we can embed sustainably, embed more sustainability and nature into businesses. And there's a couple of things I just want to sort of highlight on those, on that side. As Melissa mentioned, I'm leading a nature positive project at CCI. So we really need this nature positive approach, and to be clear on what that actually means and how we go about it. So as defined by the multi-stakeholder nature positive initiative, of which we're part and many other CCI partners are, nature positive is a global societal goal aiming to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030 and restore it by fully restore it by 2050 through measurable net positive biodiversity outcomes. And so there's increasing business, government commitments to that, most obviously reflected in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework's mission. But yeah, it's the delivery, the how to actually deliver that on the ground is far from well kind of understood. So that's part of what we want to do about part of the aim of the project. It's to develop a CCI strategy on this work. We're all doing a lot of work, but it's looking at how we can better work together on this. And as one thing we've been working on is some draft principles to help delivery and kind of help clarify some of these issues and to avoid misunderstanding or greenwash, frankly. And I was at the Global Nature Positive Summit in Australia last month as well, hosted by Australia. Hosted by Australia. And so there is this big momentum, but we really do need to understand how we map and track our way, the pathway to contribute for different actors to contribute to that nature positive goal. And that sort of the next point here is that nature is complicated, as was made clear in the book. And that's something where hopefully we can sort of talk about how we could help here, maybe. Mention the alphabet soup of standards. And we know that in sustainability standards, biodiversity is usually being kind of lacking. And it is the most complicated, it's much more complicated than greenhouse gas emissions. In order to help deliver the nature positive goal, there's a really critical need for more investment and focus on data collection, collation and management, and the associated decision-making tools and guidance to help different actors deliver that. And then we've got challenges with for businesses in terms of things like limited corporate disclosure. And the necessary location-specific data on the ground, both in terms of company activities and biodiversity data. So there's a whole load of things that are quite difficult. And as part of the Nature Positive Initiative, they've been developing state of nature outcome metrics. And again, we need clear metrics, but also to understand that in the context of the pathway and the tools to deliver them. So that's something I think maybe we can talk about, and something that collectively we're doing a lot of work on here at CCI. And tools like the Integrated Biodiversity Assessment tool are looking through that. We've got developing reports, like a report for the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, which is mentioned in the book, and Marva Foundation has helped support the development of that. So how IBAC can help deliver on TNFD requirements, and also the development of metrics like the STAR species threat abatement and restoration metric, and embedding that within IBAC. So things that are in place, develop, but need lots of potential to develop, and need to develop those further. And yeah, equally work together to look at the kind of policy, the enabling conditions that we need to can collectively work on. The need for partnerships. We all have our own kind of areas of expertise, but again, I think this is where CCI can help. I'm in a policy team, but we have really strong science. So together we can kind of look at what's needed, both in terms of addressing those enabling conditions and helping them to deliver on the ground. And I just thought I'd finish with a case study from as a sort of CCI partner here. And André noticed the pink flamingo pin I have here, and it starts off the book with memories of childhood in the Camargue wetlands. So on giving a wetlands example, and one where I think, yeah, we need to take that nature positive approach. So BirdLife has been working across different flyways. Our first flyways initiative project has got a commitment from the Asian Development Bank for investment of $3 billion in 10 countries, 50 for the conservation and restoration of 50 coastal wetland sites down the East Asian, Australasian flyway. So that's a really exciting, big scale, cross flyway scale project, an initiative to support that joined up action that we need across the flyway. The Asian Development Bank has just also last week released its safeguards after a very long consultative process, and those are now one of the strongest multilateral development safeguards. So they're looking at both both those aspects. Together, we need to make sure that a development bank or a company's actions address the entire mitigation and conservation hierarchy. So not just nature positive that focuses on the positive end, but also addressing the impacts of development at the mitigation side. So yeah, that example with the Asian Development Bank, they're one of the 10 multilateral development banks that committed to nature positive investments at COP26. So yeah, looking at how we can also work with them to make sure that their entire portfolios are nature positive. So yeah, I think I'll wrap it up there. Lots more, hopefully, we can talk about in the discussion, but yeah.
And lovely to kind of bring it back to the wetlands, which is, of course, where André's book begins in a very, very powerful way, and indeed on the front cover. I thought we might have a picture up here. I didn't bring my copy, but there's a wonderful cover picture of a scene in the Camargue, in those southern French wetlands. So some great comments and a few questions embedded in there. I don't know, I mean, André, would you like to come back and say a little more around any of the points that have been raised? I mean, there are some about, as it were, how one shapes a business strategy in the way that you did at Roche, some about the wider system changes and how businesses can work together around those.
So
the communication side.
Maybe just 3 remarks. I mean, remark number 1, obviously, my introduction was so inept. I mean, there were so many interesting things which came out afterwards. I barely scratched the surface of the book. Please read it. There's much more information.
Please read it. It's great.
And I was just trying to give it a little bit of a talking approach. Secondly, we've talked about finance and we talked about nature. And if we really want to create in the long term a product of nature that we can trade, the thing we need to reconsider first and foremost is that as humanity, our common ownership, our commons is nature. And if we've constructed a financial system which does not support that, well, it starts becoming destructive. And the current financial system does not serve humanity. It serves certain parts of humanity very well, but it doesn't serve the majority of them. The fact that we lend to developing economies in an economy placated on the dollar, and the dollar is obviously has its own domestic problem, it's just obviously not something that's going to work in the long term. And so I think that where academia, where NGOs, where business can work together is on restructuring this entire financial system. And I'm very glad that you raised that up. And thirdly, the point I want to make is that there's so much more knowledge in the room than I have. I would love to hear the questions so that we can sort of enter into a conversation about most of the points. And thank you very much for summing them up. I have the impression that reading the book sort of developed more thoughts than we've put into it. So let's listen to what people are saying.
Yeah. I would absolutely I mean, I don't know how many of you in this room have read this book. You'll be able to buy copies after this talk, but I'd really recommend it. It's very riveting. It's a thoroughly good read, as well as being full of, I think, very, very important wisdom and advice, but some great stories there. Peter, do you want to, I mean, you're very much a co-author in this. I mean, are there anything else that you would like to add about this book and about how you came to co-author with André? I'm very interested in the way in which you worked together and combined your interests, and it would be good to hear a little bit about that, and perhaps there are points that you'd like to respond to that the discussants have raised.
Sure, yeah, maybe first on the first question, and I agree with André, by the way. It's amazing to be here. Also amazing to see the audience. You know, we've had the privilege to go to a few places to present our book, and I have to say I'm amazed, even though we haven't gotten the questions yet from the audience, just by seeing all of you, the diversity of the audience is amazing. That's amazing. André and I, we wrote this book together. André is somebody, he hasn't yet mentioned it now in his initial remarks, but one of his points that he always makes is about the need for leaders to show humility and courage. And I very much recognized when I met André that he embodied those two characteristics. And I very much have come to believe that is true, that we need those two aspects in leaders. Humility and courage. And so I was drawn to André for that reason, because he displayed those. And then, you know, the thing I'll say, that we've talked to some people in the audience already about, you know, how you bring about change. You know, you mentioned systemic change, how you bring that about. It's a question that André and I, on our quite long train journey today, also talks about how do you bring about systemic change. And we thought about that, of course, and we present some ideas in the book, and André has talked about a few of them already. Two things, perhaps. One is, you know, one of the things we talk in the book is how sometimes systemic change can also come bottom up, which is perhaps not what you initially might think. The micro example that André gives in the book is about Roche, and how, in fact, things that really seemed to have sort of not really a material impact at the company, like people making bird boxes, or letting the grass grow, which I thought when I first heard that, I thought when André said that example to me, I said, wow, you must have been really offended when people did that, when you're talking about systemic change and people build bird boxes in the company. And you said, no, because, you know, what it did is that people had a personal connection to the systemic change that's needed. And that then enables later on, when there are strategic initiatives, to have the buy-in that you need from everyone involved in the system. And so that's the first element that I appreciated about that. You know what, I realized this is such a nice environment where you feel people think and listen, that you have you want to talk, but no, I'm going to stop there for now and move to other comments.
Fantastic. Look, let's open up. There are lots of people in this room. I know you've all got lots of incredibly relevant experiences and insights to share around this kind of big problematique, as well as questions. So why don't people raise your hand? We've got a catchbox mic, which is starting here at the front with Isabel. So whoever gets in for the first question, she's going to throw you the mic, and then subsequently it can be passed around the room. So we've got a long throw, because we've got someone, the lady in the brown jacket behind David there. Okay. So if you can throw it all the way over there and catch it, next to Anil, and so pass it back. And perhaps people, lovely, great, well done. And it's a team sport, so perhaps people could also just introduce themselves as well when they speak.
So I'm Harriet Hannibal, and I work with the Centre for Carbon Credits, and I also work for Cambridge Zero on policy. And I love the book. One of the sort of things I would love to understand, given the noise around ESG and woke and the retreat, could you expand a little bit on your thinking about why you choose the word of capital, which is a fantastic word and certainly means something to me. I have a finance background, so capital is all about what you can do in the short, but also very much in the medium and long term. But could you just talk a little bit about why you decided not to rely on ESG? Was it very deliberate? Why did you use capital? That would be a wonderful question from my point of view. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Shall I reply? Yeah. I think yes.
Then I might take a group, but that's a sort of quite fundamental question. So.
No, for me, the narrative behind ESG is to help people who are making financial investment to understand what the other company are there. It's about disclosure. It's about transparency. Whereby what we are really looking for here is the other side of the equation, the management account type of thing. You know, how can you develop a management tool? How can you actually allocate resources in the right way? And if you think about disclosure when you make your initial decision, you're not going to get to the bottom of it. You need to really think about how you allocate resources before you enter into the business process. In other words, if I start there and I report here, it's not going to be the same information that I need to report to start here. Sorry, it's the use in business of management account compared to financial reporting. And I think capital expresses that better. Capital is the sort of raw material that you can use to create something, to create a value that is, I hope, more sustainable if we take into account all this. So the distinction between ESG and capital is that capital is about doing and ESG is about reporting what you've done. And I think that's a big difference.
That's very clever. Okay, good. Okay, so who'd like to go next? Okay, we go all the way down to the front. There we go. We're testing your throwing capabilities.
This adds a level of fun to the event. André, I really enjoyed your book, and I was really, hit by this question: how could it be that at a time the awareness and funding for nature is near an all-time high, there's also more destruction of natural capital than ever before in human history? And I guess I kind of want to go back to a question that Lindsay talked a little bit about, which is, you have a really strong critique of philanthropy in the book that resonates with me. But what is the role of philanthropy now, or what is the role of philanthropy in the future?
Okay, great. I think we might perhaps take a few comments and then come back to the panel. So, okay, little short throw behind you, and then I'll come over there. And if people could just say who they are as well, that'd be great.
Thank you. I was just thinking that these kinds of arguments have been made actually for a very long time. And it's very exciting to have a fresh contribution to the debate on the basis of very long historical experience, which has not always been in the public eye. So it's great to have that. And Peter, thank you for picking up, I think, two key points about leadership, which is humility and courage. And of course, well, they're of course André's points, but Peter picked them up and underlined them. And
it's difficult to be humble when people praise you in public.
But this is in contrast to what we often see in business, which is not humility and courage. It is greed and lust for power. That's really what marks a lot of business people, sadly. And so I wonder whether we don't need an analysis of why it is that businesses nurture and accept and reward greed and lust for power rather than humility and courage. What is structurally wrong with our corporate systems globally that we reward the wrong things? And along the same lines, do we not need, and this is a question addressed to Professor Prabhu, do we not need a more perceptive and incisive analysis of why it is that many of the gains in business that have been made by what we might call our movement over the last 70 years are now beginning to be reversed? What is actually wrong with our systems that instead of seeing progress in the right directions, we are actually seeing reversals now? It was just today, wasn't it, that Walmart has announced that it's actually taking back some of what we would all consider progressive moves. So perhaps we need to change our thinking a little more than we have done so far, to look at what actually is wrong with our structures more perceptively and deeply. I wonder whether you would have any comments to that, André, and indeed the whole of your panel.
Lovely. I'm just going to get
but
one more. We might just go to...
The two are so close, you know. The two are so close, we could answer it.
Okay, well, why don't we come back on those, and I'll turn to you as well.
As Peter says very rightly,
Yeah.
if you stretch our memory too much, we're going to forget things. But I think the two are very strongly, the 2 points are very strongly linked. For a long time, not for a long time, for the past 70 years, but maybe the last 50 years, we've been sort of separating things in little closets. So making money is professional. Yeah? Making money not in a moral or immoral way, but in an amoral way. It doesn't matter what the consequences are, you make money first. And then, of course, you can give back to philanthropy. And you have this word, you know, give back. Give back implicitly means that you have taken. And I'm sorry, I don't believe I have taken. I have given some people the opportunity to co-create something for the benefit of the patient. As you very rightly said, the purpose of the company, you know, doing today what the patient needs next is really what we're trying to promote. But this idea of it's okay if I overprice or if I have predatory behavior in business because I give back at the end. I mean, that reasoning is very potent, you know. A lot of people, I have a lot of good friends in business who behave like you just described, in full knowledge that they are doing the right thing because their value system corresponds to that. So when we're talking about why our business is making a comeback, it's because business practices that are predatory are now making a comeback. It's because people are convinced that it is the best solution to solve the issue. You know, they're not all sort of drinking baby's milk every morning, or baby's blood every morning. They're collectively thinking that by creating more value for society, we're going to save the planet. Clearly, that's wrong, but I mean, that's my opinion.
Okay, good point. Yeah.
I was interested, there was a question.
Yeah, there was a question, yes.
Absolutely.
Jaideep, did you want to respond also there?
Yeah, absolutely. So where does one begin, you know? So I think you start with, first of all, the intellectual case. And Lindsay pointed out, the dominant belief is that the business of business is profit. The social business of business is profit. Yeah. And profit is important, yes, but it's sort of like, you know, you need oxygen to live, but that's not the reason you live. But profits have become the reason why business exists. Now, that's, of course, being questioned intellectually, but also in practice. As I said, I mean, I've interviewed, you know, scores of people from, you know, the leadership of very large listed companies. Many of them are seeing the strategic importance of having a purpose which is social and environmental in nature, but which also enables them to perform for the markets. They see that they need to do that strategically for their long-term prosperity, for their survival even. They try to embed it within the organization, but it's very hard to do. Some of the reasons we picked up on, for instance, simply the metrics, right? So for decades, we have very clear ways of measuring financial performance and financial capital. It's much harder trying to measure social capital and social performance, natural capital, we don't have the metrics. We've just been talking about, you know, and then to police those things, you know, even if people have these commitments, how do we hold them to those commitments? So these are difficult things for even small businesses to do, let alone big established businesses. And then it's this point about the alignment between the stated purpose and their business model, how they make money. In established companies, their business model is often the purpose was to maximize shareholder value, and that's the only purpose. Now, if they're trying to retrofit a social and environmental purpose on top of that, it's very hard to do. But that's why it was very interesting to see in Roche's case, and there are others too, large companies, where there is that alignment between how you're making money and your social and environmental purpose. Yeah. It's quite difficult, but that's what I was very interested to know about and read about in the book.
Great. So if our catchbox mic is there, could it go, did you have a question yourself?
I did have a question.
Absolutely. So, but also please introduce yourself as well.
Is this on?
Yeah,
okay.
It is.
Hi, yes, thank you guys so much. I'm Robert Powell. I'm a PhD researcher here in the CCI as part of the Plant Sciences Department. And my question really comes down to going beyond this measurement and kind of balance sheet approach, right? So you can have a company or organization, they can start to value nature, they can start to recognize the value that nature provides them, and they can start to invest in nature, let's say, to support their own business into the future. But what is the pathway to then kind of unlocking partnerships beyond that? So if you have a company that does, recognize nature, how do you make sure that their insurance company recognizes that as well? How do you make sure that one of their trading partners or a key contractor recognizes that, so that they're also contributing and recognizing nature within their supply chain, more or less? So how do you kind of catalyze that systemic change that's necessary to really, actually make nature something that businesses care about?
Really good point. We just pass it back. I think Joe had a question there. It's a small throw. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Joe Elliott from Fauna and Flora. An economist, 40 years. I've spent my career trying to bring purpose into business. And I have to say, I wish we could say we'd won this battle. We are still in the very early stages. We're making a lot of progress, which is great. I have a question really. André, congratulations. I'm sorry, I haven't read your book yet. I am one of the many people in this room, I suspect, who's looking forward to doing so. But I am curious as to, picking up on what some of the other people have said as well, where we're at with this question of voluntary compliance. Because I'm noting that, for example, the TNFD, so the Task Force on Nature-Based Disclosures, the Paulson report that said we're $800 billion a year in the red on nature, and I know we're 1.3 trillion on climate, so climate's got an even bigger challenge ahead. But I'm also noting that business, in Cali, there was this, I thought, rather interesting proposition from the UK government for this DSI fund, which would have taken 1% of all gross revenues on the pharmaceutical sector. And that was, it was being requested as something that the corporate sector would agree to on a compliance basis, but then it went through, I think, in the end on a voluntary basis. I'm curious as to what your sense is of whether the time has now come to do a little bit more on the mandated side rather than the voluntary side of corporate engagement, just given the place where we've got to now, which is, unfortunately not many. I admire greatly what you've managed to do within Roche, and I just think, sadly, that is not yet the case of much of the world that we're operating in, and actually the prospects are for it to get a little bit bleaker, I think.
I think we'll take one more in this round. So the person in green here. Very good. And please say who you are.
Hello, Isabel Cohen, Nature Finance, although an alumna of CCI,
Wonderful.
kind of in a weird way. I just want to pick up a little bit where Joe left off on things like TNFD, on the basis that the financial economy doesn't exist in its own, doesn't exist in a vacuum, it exists in participation with the real economy and the political economy. TNFD, which has been hailed as kind of game changer in aligning global financial flows, has received enormous political pushback in global southern countries as non-tariff barriers to trade, and is having difficulty landing. I wondered, reflecting on the role that a global university can play, where the intersection between financial real economy and political economy might exist to advance nature and climate for planet and people in such a way that it is possible and helps perpetuate sustainable development in the global south.
Okay, so another great set of questions. Do you want to come back on some of those? We'll also perhaps turn to the panel unless someone else would like to go first.
Well, a couple of acronyms: TNFD, DSI. Political economy. These are things which are, of course, working in concert. The first question about, the idea of ESG as a way of valuating business is, as I said before, a question of cost rather than a question of opportunity. If we look at capitals, there is a possibility to do something with this capital to create the value we need. So really, we have to basculate the whole idea of reporting on nature from an obligation, from a from an obligation to an opportunity, from a cost to an opportunity to invest. And I think businesses are good at identifying opportunities, and if they get to the point where they think it is in their interest to invest into nature, it will happen. But for that, we first need to define what the nature market is, what are the products, and one of the products could be DSI, the DIS, no, DSI, sorry, get confusion. And yes, the idea that companies who benefit from nature, who benefit from genetical information, should pay for it. I think that makes a lot of sense. But then immediately in Cali, there was an exemption for all the food industry. I'm sorry, the food industry is the one who really sort of looks after the digital, the genetic capital. But the point, I think, in that particular instrument of voluntary towards mandatory is that it's fine to be mandatory if it is on a level playing field. But if you're getting to the point where A, part of the industry is not connected, and B, some people are doing it, some of the people are not doing it, you cannot really create a regular flow of income. It looks a little bit like if the countries are trying to default themselves towards business by creating some sort of arbitrary measurement, which is not really helping us to create the long-term value we want. So it's important that we do have a mechanism which puts a price on nature, and trading is the important bit of that. You know, what you need in a market, you need a product, you need liquidity, you need regulation, and here regulation fails, so you say it's going to be voluntary. Difficult to, we were talking about policing, difficult to implement and to control. But the origin of the thinking is not wrong. We just need to make sure we find a mechanism that works. It does look a little bit like if country defaulting on business, and that's something that worries me slightly. You know. And then political economy. Does anybody want to comment about this?
Well, we have experts in the audience, I know, on political economy, but I wanted to pick up I suppose the question around, you know, what if there are businesses or organizations that actually do see the value? I think there are a huge number, as Jaideep was saying, that there are lots of businesses that get it. They're just trapped and working in markets where the markets will punish them if they voluntarily take action, their competitors aren't. So it's just really hard. We're trying to solve long-term challenges in markets that reward only short-term performance and don't factor in and price in, cost in, make mandatory, all of this. But we surveyed 1,000 people in financial institutions, and they all said, yes, the financial system's broken. We need to change it. You know, they don't get up wanting to trash the planet, but the market they're in requires them to keep performing in a way that does. And I think there are very real challenges. There are for innovators. We have a lot of innovators in our network and ecosystem who've got brilliant nature-based solutions. There are huge barriers to market entry. It's better for nature, but it's not yet necessarily better for customers unless the customer's prepared to pay a premium, because you know, it can be more expensive, and there are big incumbent businesses that are still profiting from current subsidies, today's business models. So this does link then to political economy. We are going to have to shift subsidies. We're going to have to shift taxation. We're going to have to do pricing. We're going to need some early stage R&D financing. And what we're trying to do with business is say, this is in your own interest to get a level playing field. You won't, it's a question of survival. It's not just a question of more bureaucracy. But that then links to TNFD. Quite a lot of regulation has only driven disclosure and reporting, but there's no benefit to businesses. It is more reporting, but it doesn't help you in the market particularly. It's just a bigger burden. So we have people being burnt out through disclosing more, but markets aren't correcting. So we do need to go the extra mile to make that data matter. Otherwise, we don't have all the data, but even if we did, it wouldn't be an unlock. So we do need to have a level of political ambition. And so the question is, how do we unlock that? But there's no shortage of momentum and interest and appetite and desire, I think, to respond to the challenge that you raised.
Yeah, okay, good point. Yeah, please.
One is I wanted to pick up on a point that André made earlier about this, also shifting the way we think about sustainable business and moving from compliance and a box-ticking exercise, a regulatory compliance issue, which is how ESG has become in a way, to this idea that it's an opportunity to do something new that's creative, that will solve important problems, make lives better, but also generate profits, And that's why I think newer businesses can do that it's harder for established businesses to do it. So that I just wanted to pick up on that important point. Then I thought Isabel was asking a question about the role of global universities. So I want to take up that opportunity. And you know, I would say this as someone at Cambridge, but I think global universities like Cambridge can be a very important, can play a very important role, and actually are playing a very important role, because this is a systemic problem, as we've said. It requires expertise in so many different areas, and Cambridge has that expertise in many different areas. And we actually talk to one another from time to time, even though we're in our silo. You know, events like this are a great opportunity to do that. And looking out in the audience, I see colleagues from other parts of the university who are very passionate about these issues and are approaching it from their particular angle. And it's important to have these conversations and to do more of that. And I think Cambridge, in a way, is uniquely positioned to be able to offer these kinds of holistic solutions. First of all, understand the problem in this holistic way, and then offer solutions. So I think global universities like ours have a very important role to play, not just from the research, by the way, but also from the teaching element, because the next generation then can take these ideas and make them happen. So.
Yeah, in the book we talk about the example of a swimming pool. Everybody swims in his own line, and you very rarely cross. But if somebody fools the water or fouls the water at the other end, we're all in it together. And this idea that even in a university where quest of knowledge should be the first that drives us, we still don't talk to each other, or rather you still don't talk to each other. You know, there is something there which is I suppose, it's this question of humility again. From time to time you must accept that you cannot do it on your own.
Yeah. I mean, I might just, I'll come to you, I might just jump in at this point. There's a lot of the many things I enjoyed in the book. One of them was about the power of coalitions. And you've got a wonderful chapter actually about COP28, about the way the B team, so this group of enlightened businesses, spearheaded a movement which then brought on board civil society groups, celebrities, global political leaders, who all pushed for what became a kind of petition and did drive through those positive changes at COP28 that unfortunately have not been continued in Baku. And earlier on, I think Peter made the point, which again, both of you make in the book, about the ways that big transformations don't just need to be driven from the top down by regulation and compliance and state action, but also can come through, I often use the metaphor of sort of pathways, the little bush paths of citizen action or small business action, which then links up and coalesces and becomes a force for bigger change. And I'd just be very interested on your reflections as to, I mean, we've talked about kind of markets and states, but there's also civil society and the roles of citizen action, or perhaps businesses as citizens, which they are in a way, and they're run by people and they employ people, they are their social capital and human capital. Is this part of the model for change? I saw it implicitly in the book, but I'd love your thoughts on it a little bit further.
So I think the only thing that will allow us to really change the way we operate is this notion of human capital. I vaguely talked about the pathology before. You know, a lot of us are behaving in a way which is not necessarily what we think, but what we think people want us to do. You know, when I shave in the morning, look myself in the mirror, I'd like to be able to say, well, today I've done something positive according to my beliefs. But a lot of us cannot do that. A lot of us don't want to do that. And we end up, you know, in neuroscience, you talk a lot about the brain that knows and the brain that does. And it's not necessarily the same one. But if you really want to be in this top of the pyramid, you need to be able to, well, you need to be able to take ownership. You need to be able to do what you think. Otherwise, you're schizophrenic. And if you're schizophrenic, you need a doctor. And if you need a doctor, you probably can get a cure for this. But that's maybe. But at some stage, you really need to accept the fact that it's exactly your problem, not just to wake up and say, oh, you know, the Russian this, the American that, you know, the White House this. It's us individually. And I think that makes a big difference. If we can cure this collective schizophrenia, we can really move forward on this agenda of sustainability. Otherwise, it's going to be more difficult.
No, good points.
On the
coalition part of things, and how these sort of social change almost happens. You know, I've looked at this also. You know, you mentioned the Nature Positive Initiative. You've got the nice little pin there.
Yeah, very nice one.
The Nature Positive Initiative is also such an example. We're just looking at it now as well, of how it came about, that initiative and that goal. The COP28, sort of how the business leaders sort of helped push sort of that message. We gotta get an agreement here is one, and actually the previous COP, the Paris Agreement, and in Glasgow also, you know, you've seen those things that were not necessarily, you know, one government or one individual saying this is what the outcome that I want, but it was sort of like a social. There was a social element to it, and I take a particular interest in that because you know I actually do think that that real systemic change, that it also comes in part by groups of individuals gathering, having conversations, sort of having a meeting of the minds, and then all having a sense of ownership over the idea that they want to accomplish, and then going out not in a fully coordinated way, but each in their own way to go about in achieving that. And I've seen that now a couple of times. We've seen that with the Nature Positive Initiative. We've seen it with the COP28 in the book, and with others. And that's, I think, a very interesting model that maybe, you know, when you talk about Cambridge being such a great place to achieve these things, you know, those are the kinds of things that, you know, I look at them as sort of a curious, interested person, but I'd love to have somebody look at that with a little bit more rigor in an academic way, and I'm sure that beautiful things can come from it. Thank you.
Social tipping points and the like. Great. Well, I think we've got time for sort of one more round, and then we'll come back to the panel. So, Harshina, I don't know where our microphone's gone. Oh, it's there. Oh, Noelle, did you want to jump in there? So sorry.
Yeah, just on the sort of coalitions point, and a bit of an elephant in the room sometimes. I'm banging my own drum here, but seems to be governments. And actually, I feel like we're working more closely. There's more energy and kind of feeling of a need to move forward with this from business and finance, civil society, and we don't have the governments like in the room with us beyond a kind of. I mean, there are those discussions, but really it's more about there's negotiations, there's getting some text in, and there's but we don't have. Is there a need to actually bring them into some of the detailed discussions on the hows and the whys and the enabling conditions to get beyond this short-termism and to look at the compliance issues? You know, essentially, you know. What we're driving at is for a systemic change, and that requires fundamentally government level action. So it feels like it's something it's sort of on the edge of our minds rather, and it needs to be a bit more upfront and central, and we find ways and means of doing that better.
Can I just add something to that? I think the problem will not be solved by each of us individually. It will be solved by people who are acting for us. So, you know, the financial sector, fiduciary duty, you invest money, you have to produce a return. Special emissaries to the Baku conference has to bring back a report to his nation in the best possible interest. And as long as we don't agree that it is also an individual task and that it is also an individual value-based task, it's going to be very difficult. But of course, an emissary of, Russia going to Baku has to bring back a result to the Kremlin. And if he doesn't bring back a result, where is he going? So you have to sort of align these two agendas, and that's, I think, a very difficult thing to do.
Of working through this.
Absolutely.
We're having, you know, the delivery at this often different rooms, and governments are doing their own thing. There isn't an adequate whole of society approach to nationally determined contributions and national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Those sorts of processes, we're not working closely enough together to deliver on these global targets, I feel. So just to maybe think about how we do that better.
Good. Okay, we're going to take just 3 more, quick points. So Harshini first.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Harshini, and I work for Melissa and Andy here. But more relevantly, I think I'm the former program manager for the Sri Lanka Business and Biodiversity Platform. And this question has been on my mind for a long time. My apologies, sir, if you have already addressed this in your book, but a quick Google search just told me that in the EU, only 99% of the businesses are made up of SMEs. World over, it ranges between 70 and 90% of the business, of the total businesses. So we're talking of systemic change, we're talking of coalitions for change, and we're talking of supply chains. I would like to know your opinion of how all these big businesses who have the flexibility and the freedom and the resources to do reporting through the TNFD or whatever other mechanisms there exist, how these big businesses can actually hold hands with the SMEs to bring them into the fold for actual systemic change. Because we have a few of these big, really big businesses in the world who are looking at these things either voluntarily or because it's mandatory. But either way, it's the small businesses that are being left behind. And they're being left behind because they don't have the capacity, the infrastructure, and they're mostly forced into doing what the big businesses are telling them because they form the supply chain. But how can the big businesses actually help these businesses to, do these things voluntarily? And also, because I personally don't feel that this is something that big businesses can do and expect the others to follow. This is not something that you can expect people to follow, but you have to create the enabling environment for these small businesses to be able to do this on a voluntary basis. So what is your opinion on this, sir?
Great question. Right, we're going to take two more just quickly. So coming down to the front here.
Peter, what was the hardest thing about writing this book? André, the book draws a lot on European corporate case studies and issues. What's the pathway for convincing corporates in Asia and Africa who really are at the forefront of a lot of extraction and destruction of nature?
Sarah, did you have another question just next? No, or was that Rick? Okay. So then I think there was one more here. So a throw to the back.
Whoa,
and please introduce yourself. Great throw.
Hi, I'm a biologist, and I'm trying to understand how life engineers species interactions that underpin key ecosystems like coral reefs. We've been talking a lot about structural change and policy, but I'm curious about what you think the role of scientific innovation and technological innovation is going to play in bringing about the kind of change we want to see. And do you think we already have the knowledge and the technological innovation that we need to solve these problems, and we should just focus on structural change? Thanks.
Great. So science, small businesses, going global.
Wow.
A few small questions. Let's have, André, perhaps your final responses, and then I will turn back to the panel for a last word as well.
Well, for small, how can we incentivize small businesses to be changing away from the current profit at all cost model? I think it has a lot to do with social norms. You know, the conversation we've had several times about the business of business is business. You know, the Nobel Prize in 1976 from Milton Friedman, and the whole school of economics of Chicago in the 70s, early 80s, has allowed us to adopt a behavior which I described as amoral before, but really which is not taking into account the consequence of what you're doing. So a business which has to behave in an amoral or in an immoral way in order to make a profit is a business that is not sustainable. Because socially, we don't want that. So if small SMEs say, well, you know, I really have to rape the widow in order to be able to make money, there's something wrong with that business model. And because there's something wrong with that business model, we should address it as humans. We should address it as decent people. And I'm pretty sure that the quest for income can be solved by a general solution that we can look at together, rather than just asking an entrepreneur to cut corners in order to make his profitability. I mean, it sounds a little bit like wishful thinking, but I'm pretty sure that if you really rewrite the business models of these small companies, you will see that there are ways of doing it differently. And so that famous dilemma, purpose versus profit, which I always hear every day, it's okay because you've got lots of zero in your bank account, you can afford to talk like this. No, it's really something that us humans concern us, and that's why the human capital is so important. So in the terms of climate, you've said it very rightly. Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. Of course, if you're in a supply chain, you have to comply if you want to go into the ultimate business. But everybody's Scope 3, somebody else's Scope 1. So you cannot really, or even vice versa, you can't really just narrow it down to this pursuit of profit, because at one moment there's a moral decision to be made, and I think that's important. The second question was what?
There was a question about European cases, but actually how one takes this.
That question was for Peter. What was the most difficult thing?
What was the most difficult thing?
The book, yes.
I'll give a crack at a couple of the questions. So first, maybe the question that was addressed to me about the hardest thing about writing a book, which I find to be the hardest thing about being a journalist or a writer, really, is to you have a phase in which you gather a lot of information. We had a lot of conversations, André and I, and at the end of the day, what we're doing in the book is crystallizing. This is André's wisdom accumulated over 67 years into a precise message and a book that tells that narrative. That's hard. Now, if I just apply it so that everybody can relate to this, even in this conversation, at the same time, I learned a lot of things, and I also sometimes got lost in some of the things that were said. The acronyms that were used and the thoughts we had here and that we shared here. And so I think the hardest moment is always to go from absorbing information to then making a message or a clear narrative out of it. The question about the SMEs, I've sort of developed a view that, this is where business leadership really matters. Large companies really have the largest responsibility when it comes to showing the way and making sure that companies that are in their slipstream, the small suppliers that are in their slipstream, that they have a guiding light and an incentive to follow. Because a lot of companies, small companies that are in any supply chain, if you look at their capabilities and their interests, they want to do the right thing, but they crucially depend on large companies to show them that's possible. And we've seen that in companies that we've studied, and I've seen that elsewhere too. And then on the point of the European companies versus the US companies, one company that we actually looked at, a US company, is Harley-Davidson. Yeah. And Harley-Davidson, it is a company now led by a European, but it is a very American company. I think we would all agree with that. And it's true that Harley-Davidson, after we finished the book, by the way, faced quite some challenges, in terms of its ESG and DEI practices, and like many other American companies have and will in the coming years. But the fundamental belief of the person running that company in particular has remained the same, in my opinion. And there are many examples. We looked at it even today or yesterday at American companies, including many family-run American companies and Asian companies that indeed have that same perspective. Now, there's no question that, of course, you operate within a society and a democracy and a market that is uniquely your own. Yeah.
In the book, when we talk about my great-grandfather creating the company, we're trying to sort of demonstrate that it is not, he's not a brilliant entrepreneur on his own. He's part of the society around him, the social capital that supports him. and the fact that he has been able to identify an opportunity in this. Well, the same thing with your Asian businesses, just to coin a phrase. You know, if society tolerates them in that way, that's why they're going to be like this. It really is a question of social norms. We need collectively to decide it is not okay to rape the world. It's not okay to take to mine the resources over and above what's needed. Okay. But it's not only the question of the entrepreneur. It's not just the company alone. It's the system.
Yeah, good. So look, we're pretty much out of time. I'm going to go back along our panel and literally a sentence of a take-home message that you've got that you'd like us to take on into drinks. One sentence. Crikey. Something we should be thinking about.
At one point you said nature is invisible in the book, and I think that's the bit we need to take forward from here. There's so much, and where hopefully we can collectively help making nature less visible, developing the tools, the metrics, linking to community-based monitoring, the question on technology and things there. So bringing, delivering on nature with.
Great. That's a long sentence, but it was one sentence and one key point. Thank you.
No, I don't know.
Lindsay.
Oh, I think we're at an inflection point. We've had 2 disappointing COPs. The pressure's building, but I'm seeing that actually that's opening up new possibilities. I think people are really recognizing we need to have more honest conversations, and it's breaking down some traditional boundaries. And I'm optimistic that we are seeing leadership emerging that's saying, let's be honest and recognize we need to do this differently, and an openness to working together. So spaces like this to be able to have honest conversations are also part of that.
Yeah, fantastic. Jaideep.
Sustainable business is an opportunity for creativity and innovation.
Okay.
Wow, well done.
Okay. So, great.
Can I perhaps just say one?
You can have a last word, absolutely.
No, just, I was preparing my sentence in my head, and you take it away from me.
I was going to let you off, but you've done a whole book's worth.
When I see the result of this initiative that's happening here, and when I see that in my book, I criticize philanthropy really badly because I don't think that philanthropy is the solution. How do we balance this out? Because obviously, without philanthropic support, this would not have been possible, and yet it is doing something. Yeah. But what I really want to say is this always the same sentence. It's not how you spend the money that matters, it's how you make it. And what we're trying to do with this book is to try to say that if you make it in a way that is sustainable, then we don't need philanthropy anymore, okay?
Yeah. Okay. That's a great point. So my final word is actually collaboration, which is actually the last sentence of the book. It was wonderful. I sort of read this whole book, and you come to the last bit, and actually what you talk about is the power of collaboration. And of course, that is the founding principle of CCI, and here it's collaboration between practitioners at the front line of nature and those who are thinking about it and analysing it. But there's another kind of collaboration that has really struck me in this conversation. It's that between those who understand and are doing business and philanthropy, and those who are understanding and doing things with nature, but also some of those wider social and economic and political sciences, because fundamentally, many of the questions you're exploring need the kind of analysis and action that are also driven by, and you said it yourself, it's social norms, it's political will, it's system change, which is around economic change. So I think, this has been a wonderfully rich evening of conversation, but I think it really underlines the importance of dialogue and collaboration between the thinkers and the doers, between the natural and the social sciences, and between the worlds of business and markets, citizens and civil society, and governments. So please join me in, first of all, a big round of applause to André and Peter. Then I'm very happy to invite everybody just to step nearly next door, past the DAB entrance, to the Whale Hall, where we have a drinks reception, and where copies of this wonderful book will be available at a heavily discounted special offer price, and you can even have the authors sign them but there are only 100 copies, so you'll have to get there quickly. It's first come, first served. So thanks again. Please come and join us.